That was why I started EquiRatings. If someone says to you, trust the process, and you can't actually validate or measure the process or anything around it, I'm sure how can you? You're a dad, you're an entrepreneur, you've been to a championships and you've won a medal. I went to my first Olympics. I let my performance on a horse definitely slide. I think the most powerful thing to say to any athlete, this is going to help you improve. That's a big statement. You have to measure stuff that matters. That's what we do. We measure the stuff that matters most.
We've been working with high performance teams for 10 years now. Has anything changed?
Fundamentally, I would say no. And that's hard for me to accept sometimes as well, because I think in so many businesses, sport, are we doing the simple things well? The simple thing here is, if you want to be successful, are you measuring your chance of success? Can you quantify that? Can you quantify where you are? Can you quantify where you need to get to? And can you track your progress between those 2 points? And I think to put that into real tangible language for people in equestrian sports, one of the things we're all trying to influence and improve and manage, how good is a horse? And when you think about that, we'll talk about horses being reliable and consistent. We'll talk about horses that are able to win, horses that are able to handle a big stage. That's all language. It's all qualitative, it's all subjective. But if you can't measure how good a horse is, if you don't have something to come back to, and of course you can argue around it and see maybe why past performance is being, hard on one horse or flattering another horse, but you still need an objective measurement. So that fundamental truth, I would say, that if you want to manage performance, you need to be able to measure it, that still stands.
When we began, Sam, we were focused a lot on your own performance. If you go back to kind of certainly pre-EquiRatings, but that gap between you leaving university with a very particular set of skills around, I think some of them learned in terms of, database management and different forms of analysis. Is there anything that has changed between now and then in your thinking? Is there anything that has, what remains the fundamentals in terms of what we were talking about then, what we're talking about now?
It's interesting. I know why I wanted to start EquiRatings and actually needed to start EquiRatings. Remember, it was almost walking out of my second World Championships, walking out of the arena, still in my riding gear.
When was this?
At a World Championships, 2014. Coming out of the stadium in Cannes, the biggest stage I'd been on. And I'd been to 2 Europeans in between. So it was my 4th championship, my second World Championship. But I had the same outcome. Disappointing outcome for me personally. Different reaction because Ireland had qualified for the Olympics. I was in a similar position. I was one of the last team members to jump, which means, I was in a good position on the leaderboard and then just didn't have a good finish to the competition. 2 bad outcomes. I can only now quantify in kind of modern language what was happening. I couldn't trust the process. So you hear people talking about trust the process. That's because there were no measurables in the sport. So I had 2 bad outcomes and I felt like 4 years apart. So I felt hugely different to where I was at my first World Championships in 2010 compared to where I was in my second World Championships in 2014. But because I had another disappointing result and disappointing finish, I suddenly went to myself going, have I achieved nothing in 4 years? Am I still the exact same person I was? And obviously knowing that, of course you've improved, but no evidence. I had nothing to tell me that. I had nothing to quantify, I had nothing to do it. So actually I couldn't trust the process. And in this sport, of course, I'm sure there's things you can do better in your championship. Of course, there's little things you can keep improving. But when I look back to where I was then, we started EquiRatings and I saw where I was, bottom 10% in show jumping over the next 2 years, being so focused and so driven on going, okay, this is where I am now, bottom 10% of kind of top level riders, and moving my way, overtaking riders that I knew and was competing against, validating my system, which is the art, my canter pose at home, the training exercise I was doing, but getting validation because now a little bit like an accountant of a company, now my outcomes were starting to improve. But how I measure that, the big picture, the overall metrics, trying to make sense of all that. That was why I started EquiRatings, is I had to do something, because I couldn't. If someone says to you, trust the process, and you can't actually validate or measure the process or anything around it, sure, how can you? You can't actually trust it.
That was what brought me in, the excitement of that particular period. So I was in Con. I remember that moment. I remember being there with you when yourself and Sparks were sitting at the end, and we were kind of dissecting it, and everyone was celebrating that 6th place finish because they'd qualified for Rio, and you were devastated. What got me so into it was the very tangible progress that happened in the next 2 years, where, you know, when you're talking about that bottom 10%, we had that as a chart, like it was visual. I remember the names. I remember all of the competitions, which you might not have been impacting leaderboards on every occasion that you were show jumping, but we had that concept where I was saying to you, yeah, but you've moved from, 71 in the list to 41 in the list. Like, jump clear. I don't care where you finish in this, jump clear. You're on a journey. It was so clear. It was so tangible. Talk to me about clarity in high performance, because you've talked about the language. You've talked about the multiple factors which go into how good is a horse. What do you think the numbers can bring to a team manager or to a rider in terms of clarity of purpose, clarity of planning?
I think, and this is the bit that's changed in the company over 10 years, or this is what's changed in the high performance stream, is now riders themselves want to know their metrics and have access to them, rightly so. I mean, that was why I started. I didn't start to. I think the natural thing is it's about making better decisions, right? It's about picking the right team. Actually, most countries don't have a selection problem; they have a performance problem. So you're trying to improve performance. It's not like, oh, I left my best player behind by mistake. That's not really the problem. It can help definitely to provide some clarity around that, and you still need great metrics and great minds to combine in the decision making. But what we all underestimate as human beings, because it's nearly insulting, I think, is if you measure something, you get this objective feedback, you will improve it. And it sounds too simple. But you put a watch on someone and 10,000 steps, and you talk about it, and at the end of the day, they see they're on 8,000 steps. They just go for a walk. Like, you see it happening. The people wearing whoops and measuring their sleep, and, oh, my sleep wasn't great last night. Oh, I need to stop having coffee later in the day. I need to not drink so much alcohol or do whatever. People are actually impacting their behavior. And we've been doing this for years. Like in business sales, how people sell is different, but different. The art of selling can vary from person to person, and they'll have different techniques. But the accountability of selling, and I don't mean accountability in a bad way. I think sometimes accountability is a bad word. It's just keeping yourself focused, giving yourself clarity. I think energy is another thing. Like, we're all human. I fell into this trap after. I had this great story of, my first World Championships 2010, the same thing again 2014. So we started EquiRatings, and 2018 we win a silver medal. There we go. It took about 5 minutes to say it. Great journey. But EquiRatings was booming then. The kids were now, the kids were 1 and 2 when we started the company. They're now 5 and 6. So you're a dad, you're an entrepreneur, you've been to a championships and you've won a medal. I went to my first Olympics. I let my performance on a horse definitely slide. My process, because I'm human and you can't do it all. And I was probably being a better dad, probably giving more attention, probably being more involved with EquiRatings. So I let some of my performance go. I stopped looking at my metrics. That's a big thing that changes. Whereas if even on a weekly basis, we don't compete on a weekly basis.
What are you looking at in that regard? Like, and how often?
I did this yesterday in terms of you know, when you're going to talk about high performance, it's always a reminder to myself. I just go back on and look at all my metrics. Okay, in eventing, we've got dressage, show jumping, cross country, speed, reliability. Look at where I am, a reminder that, you know, some of those I'm weak, I'm in the 40th percentile for top level. Some of them I'm high, 90th percentile. It's a reminder for motivation. What the actionable that happened from that, 2 of the horses got registered for Show Jumping Ireland again, you know, entries in for the weekend to do an extra training show that we probably wouldn't have planned, like it's Easter weekend, family are over. You have to make sacrifices. I would have easily let this weekend slip. So that's a good example of checking in.
Because you're getting a reminder from your numbers that actually that's not where I need to be.
Yeah, you know, that's a reminder where we are on paper. You always feel better, like the horse is jumping really well. You know, a year older, a year stronger, has got, you know, big 5 stars under his belt from last season, feels brilliant right now. And, you know, entered for badminton, entries are out, and that feeling of I can outperform my metrics, I can outperform my expected values, that feeling is really strong, and that belief is there. And that's true, by the way. I mean, half the people are probably going to overperform, half are going to underperform, some by very little, some by a lot. Natural variance in the sport, that's going to happen. But I have to remember to influence that. I cannot forget, you know, the things that happened last season, the things that I have to keep managing, that you kind of slip to the back of your mind when you're just thinking about the daily challenges that keep popping up.
Talk to me about measuring a performance and then a more macro measurement, like, you know, you talk a lot about ELO and the company talks a lot about ELO, which is more of an experience and a longer term measurement. Let's start with HPR, a high performance metric. This really came from a concept which, again, if we take it out of technical language, we know that not all 160 jumping competitions are equivalent. We know that they're not all the same difficulty of winning, but it's not measured, or it hadn't been measured. So it's totally accepted that to win Aachen, or to win, you know, a top global champions, or to win, I have to make sure that I name all the different series now once I've started on one, but to win a top Longines League of Nations show, or to win a top Rolex show, whatever it may be, is not the same. They all require something different. And I don't mean in terms of the challenge or the format, I mean in terms of the field that shows up and what it takes.
And we're not running the 100 meters, so it's not like I ran 9.5, and that's a really good measurement and validation of where I am as an athlete and my performance. In jumping, we take Willem Greve right now, wins Grand Prix in Gothenburg, wins a leg of the Grand Slam, first Dutch winner, huge performance, jumps clear in the first round of the League of Nations in Ocala, and then has 3 down in the second round. And we've switched to this, it's like the Olympic format in the second round, 3 from 3, no drop score. So that just, the Dutch were, I mean, they could have won. You know, I think Ireland finished on 5 at the time, they were on 0. So that's obviously really disappointing, but that's a horse in great form, producing really good results. And of course that outcome is going to be accounted for. It is going to impact the ELO a little bit, but the good results are going to also impact the ELO. And that's the really hard thing in this sport, is how do we put all this information? People have been using data in equestrian sports for decades because results are data. We all look at it, we can look at the results, but what they've had to do is sort of put up this defense mechanism and go, I mean, yeah, okay, there's results. I'm looking at the results, but I just need to get out of that. I just need to use my eyes a little bit, because it is so hard. Like, you cannot manually compute all this stuff, because you're right. Like, it could be that finishing 5th at Aachen is actually a better performance than winning something of the same classification, winning maybe a Saint-Tropez, or winning a Ballon-Denisque if you're in eventing, whatever sport you're in. So you have this disparity in course difficulty, quality of opponents, all those factors. We solve that problem for people, so we can put a number on that. And then
a number on the performance.
A number on
the quality of the performance.
Single performance. We call it high performance rating. So that's like your PB. That is like and I always say that imagine runners without a stopwatch. And I actually call the stopwatch the why. I think how you run faster, better nutrition, better recovery, better shoes, better equipment, your training, your coach, your workouts you're doing, changing up your exercises and intensity levels and all that kind of stuff. That's how you improve. And it's the same for athletes in equestrian sports. They're how they train. That's how they improve. But why you improve is that feedback. What's the stopwatch telling me? I want to get faster, like the 4-minute mile, the 2-hour marathon. And I think even, Henrik van Eckermann with King Edward, King Edward becoming the highest rated horse ever, overtaking Explosion. That's big. Henrik's aware of it. I think those things matter. I think they drive people to the next level. So I think they help the best to become better. That's your one-off performance. Because again, strategy-wise, people maybe are looking to just peak a couple of times a year and to have a measurement on peak performance. The ELO, I think, particularly with the modern Olympic format, 3 from 3, no drop scores. You don't just need quality, you need reliability. And that's what the ELO is measuring as well. So your quality of opponents beaten, but the consistency with which you perform. And that's the one that is highly correlated to probability of success going forward. That's how we weight a 150 versus a 155 versus a 160, a strong 5-star versus a weak 5-star. All of the components of that number are optimized to improve predictive performance, because your measurement has to matter. As much as we say that in order to manage you have to measure stuff that matters. And that's what we do. We measure the stuff that matters most, which is actually chance of success. Because people can end up then managing what they measure. So, anything that actually...
Yeah, measure the right thing. How has the message changed internally over the years, working alongside you on this, growing a team? We've been in conversations with high performance teams and high performance squads for a long time. You remember when we launched Simple Metrics? The concept behind Simple Metrics was actually to remove all of the jargon and the difficulty around something like an ELO and a HPR, which operate in eventing and jumping, but these kind of things that can feel a little bit intimidating. I know you're saying they aren't, but they can feel intimidating if your mind is not that way. Simple metrics was a concept in that, do you remember we said, to be a simple metric, it has to be accessible. It has to be either accessible in its creation or it's in its understanding. So you take so a 6 RA was our dressage version, your 6 run average. It had to be just your last 6 dressage tests at any level. And there was a strong element of data science behind why 6 in terms of its predictive power. How has the message changed over the years? Because it feels internally like we've grown a lot more confident in it. We've grown a little bit stronger in it. What feels different to you, or how do you feel the message has evolved?
It's the why has moved from just management to improvement. So if you like that's the belief is it's not just to make better decisions and pick a better team. It's not just about trying to get more funding from your governing body and show why the team is doing well and we have a chance of medals in the next Olympic cycle. It's not just about settling disputes. It's not just about trying to get more sponsorship in by showing quantifiable achievement. Those things are all strong and they're all very relevant to governing bodies. But I think the most powerful thing and the direction that it's moving all the time is being confident enough to say to any athlete, this is going to help you improve. Because that's a big statement, to walk into something like like accountants don't sell themselves that way, and I think they should, because accountants are kind of like something, oh well, you have to do it, it's kind of a chore. And I think that's how we were. I think that's how EquiRatings was to athletes initially. It was like, oh, I might hear about these guys when selection comes and I'm the one who's not selected. Then they'll pull the numbers out and throw them at me. Whereas what accountants are actually doing is, okay, you have to do it once a year. But every time you walk out of a meeting with your accountants, you have a clear, objective feedback on where you are. you know yourself where you need to get to, and you'll be able to see trends as well. You can see 12-month trends. Are we going the right direction? Where are our strengths and weaknesses? And that's it. You know, you'll figure out, like, you give people a bar and you say, here it is now, and we're going to raise it up here and we're going to put it here. Good competitors, sport or business, you raise the bar, they'll jump over it. But if you don't give them something that they can see, something that they can aim for, they're not going to improve.
How do they access it?
Well, we've got a high performance platform for managers, and now we've got an individual platform as well for athletes, so they can log in and use that. We're working with about 10 different nations, still more in eventing than in jumping. So athletes who are with a governing body that we're working with, going through your high performance team, athletes who you know their country's not using it, contact us directly.